Welcome to the And She Looked Up Creative Hour podcast. I'm your host, Melissa Hartfield, and I'm an artist and an entrepreneur. And yes, those two things can go together. This podcast is for the artists, the creatives, and the makers who want to find a way to make a living doing what they love. Merry Christmas, everybody. I hope you are all enjoying the day. Melissa here, obviously. And as I mentioned at the end of last week's episode, this week's episode is a replay of one of our earlier podcasts, one of our earliest podcasts, actually. This was originally episode number 3, Procrastination and Perfectionism. And in this episode, myself and my original co-host, Lisa Bolton, sit down to talk about how perfectionism and procrastination is often a way of manifesting fear. I think all of us fall into one of those two categories. We're either a procrastinator or a perfectionist, or maybe a little bit of both. But usually the underlying reason for it all is fear. And so I thought this would be a great episode to replay. It is actually one of our most popular episodes. And there's a lot of really great mindset stuff in here that we enjoyed talking about. I will just caution, the sound is not the normal quality. It was our very first full-length episode, and we've come a long way since then. But it was interesting, a few days before pulling this episode out of storage, I was watching some clips on Facebook that some friends had posted of Mr. Dressup. And if you were of a certain age, then you remember Mr. Dressup. He was on every weekday morning on CBC with Casey and Finnegan. And he was such a gentle soul. And watching this episode clip that was put up, he was making Christmas stockings. And I was so struck as I watched the episode how nobody would dare put a craft like this up on the internet today. He was using staples and things were cut out weirdly, and it was kind of a mess, but it was a magical mess. And I just remember how as a child that really just spoke to me in a way I can't explain. I didn't care that it wasn't perfect because they're not perfect. They're far from perfect. That didn't matter to me. What I thought was so cool was that he just knew how to make stuff. And he made stuff that I felt like I could make too. And I think he probably made a lot of parents feel like this was stuff they could help their kids make, because it was just random bits of cardboard and construction paper stapled together with some glue, and it was messy. But at the end, you had this Christmas stocking. And the stuff that went in the Christmas stocking was so simple. It was like a pen for his friend who liked to write, and a guitar pick for his friend who liked to play the guitar. And there's something very endearing about that. And it made me think about how wrapped up we have gotten in perfectionism, particularly with the amount of digital content that is online. And I don't know. Some days I just wish we could go back to the days of Mr. Dressup. I think there's something there about just letting yourself create and putting it out there, because somebody out there will find it magical, even if it's not perfect to you. So with that, I'm going to send you into the episode. We're going to dive right in. There won't be an intro or anything, and you can hear us on our very first episode. I hope you all have a very Merry Christmas today, and we'll be back on New Year's Day with another replay. Enjoy. So one of the things we thought we would do for the podcast for the next little while we get our feet underneath us is we thought we would do themed months. And so this first month, we are going to be looking at the theme of courage. And you might be wondering what perfection and procrastination has to do with courage, but I kind of believe that procrastination and perfectionism, those are really hard to say together. Yeah. I think that they're actually a manifestation of fear. Fear of, not talking about fear of running into a burning building, I'm talking about the fear of taking the next leap or trying the next thing or putting yourself out there. And so that's what we wanted to talk about today.
Yeah, I think it really speaks to vulnerability, and so much of your personality, your heart, who you are comes out in how you creatively express yourself. I think it's truly being kind of the most vulnerable you can be in a lot of ways. And that takes courage because you're really
Absolutely.
opening up yourself, yeah, to other people's judgments, opinions, criticisms.
Yes.
It's very,
All those things.
all of those things.
It is. It's really scary to hit the button some days.
Hmm.
And I think um, one of the things we wanted to talk about today was how do you get past that? How do
Hmm.
you get past that fear? And how do you even recognize that that's really what's going on? Because we all have moments where we procrastinate or where we worry that something's not quite good enough, like we need to
Hmm.
fix this little thing or fix that little thing. But for me, it took a long time before I realized that what I was doing was actually putting off something I was afraid to do.
Right. It's so interesting because it's not like procrastinating a chore where I'm very good at procrastinating laundry in my house. But and yet
And
I'm
yet you do
also,
laundry when you
and
don't want
I
to
do,
put something creative out.
it's funny. I'd much rather do something creative. I'm so much happier in this space. And I think it's interesting when you start looking at the reasons why you're procrastinating, doing the one thing that you actually look forward to most and that you love doing. And I think this topic really came up for you and I because it took us a while to hit the publish button on this podcast.
It did. And it wasn't something I really noticed myself or figured out that I was doing myself until I started working with clients.
Mm-hmm.
And that's when I really noticed in the early days of working with clients, especially in a field like design where it is very subjective and artistic in some ways. um, I would have clients who at first you just think they're a difficult client because they're always um, fussing over, you know, the difference between Arial and Helvetica font, which, to the to somebody who's not a designer, they're not going to notice what the difference between those two fonts
Mm-hmm.
are. But it could be that, or it could be the shade of blue, or it could be, all these really tiny little things that ultimately don't make a difference to
Mm-hmm.
the end user. And yet they would get so caught up in these little tiny details. And it took me a while to realize it's not that they were being difficult, it's that they were frightened.
Mm-hmm.
They were afraid because once it was done, it meant they had to put it out there. And that's when you put it out there, you invite you invite feedback and
Mm-hmm.
criticism, and there's a lot of fear wrapped around that. And
Mm-hmm.
interestingly, when I was doing this with clients, one of the things I noticed is that in my early days, I had a fairly even split between male and female clients. And it was far more likely to be the female clients who would go through this process. The men were much more likely to be like, yeah, it looks great. Let's just get it out there.
Let's just do it.
Let's just do it. And yet
Mm-hmm.
the women were kind of like, oh, I want the baby blue instead of the really light baby blue.
Yeah. So why is that? Why do we care so much?
I
And I don't mean about the baby blue. I mean, why do we care so much about hitting that publish button?
Well, I think like we said, it's fear. Um and I don't know why.
Mm-hmm.
Because when I think about it for myself, I've done some things in my life that are what I think a lot of people would consider scary, but it's small things like um, we created a food blogging planner for FBC, and I procrastinated on that. It was something I really wanted to do. It was something I knew was really needed, and I procrastinated on it for over a year.
Mm-hmm.
And I launched it at like 5 p.m. on December 31st. Like I
Right at
left
the
it to the
deadline.
last
Sure.
minute. And
Sure.
pressing that button to put it for sale was one of the most terrifying things I had done in a
Mm-hmm.
long time.
Isn't that funny when it's something as an outsider looking in that I think, not only is it was a perfect fit, it was a great planner. You really didn't you didn't let him see you sweat. Like as an outsider, you wouldn't have never seen that or thought, well, I would have never. I think that's silly. Like, why would she be worried about pressing the send button? It's perfect.
Yeah, and yet when I send designs to clients, like mock-ups and things, I
Mm-hmm.
always get a little bit of a flutter of nervousness when I press the
Mm-hmm.
send button, but it's not on the same scale. And
Mm-hmm.
it really got me thinking, like, why is that? And I think because when I send it to a client, I'm expecting critical feedback, not critical in
Uh,
terms of negative, but like
but a critique,
a
like
critique. Like
sure.
they're giving me feedback I can work with.
Mm-hmm.
But when I put the planner out, I made the planner that I wanted for me.
Mm-hmm.
And I think, and plus I was charging, well, I guess I charge money to my clients, but
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. There was just something about, I'm putting this out there. I really like it. It's what I would make for myself. And now I'm asking people to give me money for
Mm-hmm.
something that I made. I don't know if it's because there was enjoyment behind it as well. Because
Mm-hmm.
so it's very
It didn't
complicated.
feel like work. It didn't. Yeah.
Yeah, but I mean, what about you when you did your book? Because
Yeah. I think it's there's a lot of similar feelings, and I think one of the reasons we came up with this topic is because we both realize that our hesitation in putting ourselves out there sometimes may have stemmed from two different places. Um, for me, it helped that I had an external party driving those timelines.
yes.
So my fear of missing a deadline, letting someone down, overrid my other fear of putting out something that was, less than perfect. I know for me, I feel like there's everything has to be just right. So I will research something and change the font color 7 times and move from Helvetica to Roman back and forth because I want it to be just perfect. And the irony is, nothing I put out there is perfect, but it's perfect for me in the moment to where I needed it to be. And a lot of that came down to having to redefine my definition of perfect.
Yes, that's interesting. And that's one of the things we've noticed between the two of us is I am the procrastinator and you are the
Mm-hmm.
perfectionist. We
Yeah,
manifest it very differently.
absolutely.
And I think probably most people lean to one of those, one or the other.
Mm-hmm.
But I also think, you said two really interesting things there. One, you had an external deadline. So, and you had a fear of missing that deadline. But wrapped up in that is still a fear of people thinking less of you. If you had missed that deadline, like it's still wrapped around the fear of what people think of you.
I'm sure a therapist could unpack that
I know.
piece of luggage quite in a lot of depth. But yeah, I
But
think it is. Yeah.
the thing about it is when you are self-employed or an entrepreneur, you don't have external deadlines very often.
Mm-hmm.
So you have to create your own, which is a big stumbling block for a lot of self-employed people. You really do have to break through that whole procrastination perfectionism thing or you're never going to get out there or move forward.
Mm-hmm. One of a great book I read back in my small business banking days was called "And the Small Shall Act Big," and I'll make sure we link it in the show notes. But it really helped me when I became self-employed it to set up the kind of structure and systems that I had when I worked in a larger organization. So when I was working through the book and really struggling with what boards to create and recipes and how things should look, I had to stop and create a framework. I had to create a template. I had to put a project plan in place, and it took me a good chunk of time to put that system in place. But it was like my own pretend external deadline I had to meet. I had to like trick myself into thinking, okay, you have to have this filled out to this degree by this time, and if you don't, you'd be letting someone down, or it was just a way to hold myself accountable. And I think for others, one of the ways you can do that is really team up with an accountability coach.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, and it doesn't have to be like a coach. It could
Yeah.
be just a friend who keeps you on track, or a peer. Um, did you give yourself any kind of reward when you hit those internal deadlines once you had your framework in place?
Yeah, time off. Truthfully, it was very much because the schedule, because I was sort of doing other things while I was writing the book. Time off was my reward. So I knew if I had to hit this deadline, it would mean taking Friday night and Saturday off of writing or editing the book. And that was the greatest gift I could give to myself at the time.
Yeah, that's more of us need to do that more often, I think, to
I
be.
think when you're self employed or doing a side hustle in addition to maybe a day job, it's like it's always hanging over you. And that was a
Mm.
real hard um, switch for me to make as well. I needed to be able to put a bit of separation and not feel like, well, I should always be working on it. It wasn't about punching in and out of a clock. Always there. There's always something I could be doing. It could be overwhelming sometimes.
Yeah, when you're self-employed, it is really hard to switch off. And I don't have kids, so I I think kids give you a reason to switch off.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't have that reason all the time. So I can easily go 7 days without having a day off, or even a few hours to myself. And that's not good, because that leads to other issues like
Coming
burnout
up in
and
episode
yes,
16,
which
we'll
we
be
will
talking
talk
about
about
credit.
at a later date. But
Well, I think we kind of came up, you and I have talked about this several times, and I think being that we both come at it through different lenses, I think we were kind of able to come up with a pretty solid list, just even for ourselves, that I think other people might be able to pull one or two things out of what you can do to help break that. And, but if you can break that cycle, it's going to increase your efficiency. You're going to get, the benefit of putting more work out there, getting good feedback, which is not a negative all the time. I think a lot of good can come from getting it in front of a lot of different eyeballs. But I think we can maybe walk through some of the things that you and I have thought might help people come over that.
I think one of the first things you have to do before you can even overcome it is you have to figure out which type, not necessarily which type of person you are, but when you feel resistance to putting something
Mm-hmm.
out there, um, you have to take a step back and ask yourself, what am I doing here? Like, what is really going on? Do I really care about the font, or is it something bigger? Or do I, when you, I'm going to speak from the procrastination side because that's the one I'm so much better at. Um, but, when I start to, I really want, okay, this planner, I really want to get this planner out. And yet, uh, some minor task comes up that really isn't going to move my business forward. And I find myself doing that. And the planner keeps getting put to the next day, to the next day, to the next day, and taking a moment and stopping and saying, am I being, why am I so willing to put this off? Like,
Mm-hmm.
what's the reason behind it? And be really honest with yourself. I think this is something that gets easier as you get older, too.
Yeah, I
I
was
think
thinking that earlier.
you start to recognize your patterns a little bit more.
Mm-hmm.
Um, yeah, so I think that's really important, is to think about why you're being so resistant to putting this out there. Have a little conversation with yourself in your head.
Yeah, I'm a pretty conservative person by nature when it comes to any sort of business risk. And I think walking through that sort of what if conversation with yourself. So, this is where journaling or going through this assessment quite literally can say, so what if I send it out with Roman times? What's the worst thing that can happen? Okay, so someone comes back and says, this is way too hard to read. Okay, so what if they say that? What are my options? And I think if you could run yourself through, depending on the scale of the project, 3 or 4 what if scenarios, it can bring you comfort that you have a plan in place before you get that. So you're never caught off guard. Like I take comfort in knowing that, oh, I've already got an answer, I've got an explanation to that, maybe that pushback or feedback as to why I made the choice.
Yeah, that's a really good idea. And it can be really helpful. That's something that I do a lot too. I heard somewhere when you're afraid of putting something out there or afraid of taking the next leap, ask yourself what the worst possible outcome
Mhm.
of doing this could be. And when you really think about it like that,
Yeah.
putting most of the things we do in our businesses are not going to result in death, not going to result in
You're listening to the wrong podcast.
that's right. They're not going to result in your house collapsing in on you. They're going to be relatively small things, but just going through that act of thinking what the worst thing that could happen and then asking yourself, is that really realistic that that's actually going to happen, can
Yeah.
be really helpful.
The odds of it happening are so slim. At the end,
Yeah.
it's like, yeah. So I think if you've gone through that, um, there's a very good chance you're not even going to have to deal with that. But at least you've had the opportunity to work through the emotions that it might bring up ahead of time on your own terms in your own space. I also think we overestimate our own importance sometimes.
We
Do
all
you?
do that.
I think that you think people care more than they really do. People are self absorbed in their own lives, rightfully so. And I think they're not going to lose sleep over the font choice you made. If your content is strong, your art is strong, you're connecting with people emotionally, the details that paralyze us from putting our work out there aren't going to matter.
Yes. And when you think about it, what all these people are going to think of you, just remember in the back of your head that what you're doing right now is being self absorbed, that
Mm-hmm.
you're being as self absorbed as everybody around you is. So
Mm-hmm.
remind yourself, if I'm this self absorbed, worrying what everyone's going to think about me, then that's probably what all those people are thinking about when they get up in the morning. What's everybody
Mm-hmm.
thinking about this purple top that I'm wearing? Or, that's just human nature. We tend to be very self absorbed creatures.
I think people also connect to the imperfect. I think it's okay to and this is really hard for me because I feel like everything has to be so just right before it goes out beyond my four walls. But I'm thinking what resonates most with people is often the opposite. It's something that might be a little clunky or unpolished or unfinished. I think there's beauty in the work in progress shots, people seeing some of the stuff behind the scenes. Um, I think that can connect to people sometimes more than the perfectly polished piece does. I think it's something that as I've gotten older, I've gotten more comfortable with as well. So I don't know if that my 25-year-old self would put as much out there as I am now in terms of sort of my work. But I do think as you get older, you don't take as personally. I don't want to say you don't care because I definitely care, but I definitely don't take as personal the feedback or especially the negative or the criticism or even sometimes the silence. Sometimes that's the worst criticism is the silence that I didn't have an impact.
Crickets, yes.
Sometimes saying nothing. But I do think that changes as you get older as well.
I think so too. I kind of joke sometimes that I'm a recovering perfectionist because I used to be very much a perfectionist, putting things out there. But I think when you've run a small business for 10 years, you get over that very quickly because
Mhm.
you realize that you you become
Mhm.
so busy that you don't have time. You don't have time
Mhm.
to be a perfectionist because if you are, nothing gets done. And I think having a business partner helps with that too because it's somebody to push you through.
Yes, exactly. And that's even that accountability coach. Like you said, that could be a friend, that could be your business partner, just someone that you can say, I need you to, hold me accountable to these deadlines.
Absolutely.
Another thing I find helps too is if I can preface the discussion around the work I'm creating as sort of an advanced copy or beta testing. Like, I'm just floating by a rough copy as opposed to putting it out there at the final stages because the feedback's very valuable.
It is. And that's a really great idea doing, especially if you're launching a product of some kind.
Hmm.
It could be like a beta launch and you invite people in. You can even do it in a way that it makes those people feel really special, like they're getting a sneak peek. with the opportunity to have feedback into the final
Mm-hmm.
product. And a lot of people really like that. They like that opportunity to be part of something, the creation of something.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that's a way that you can take your creative process to your audience and invite them into it. And at the same
Mm-hmm.
time, it helps you get past that fear of putting something out there because you're telling them from the get-go, this is not the finished product. Like
Mm-hmm.
if there's something weird or that you don't like there's an opportunity to fix it.
A lot of restaurants take that approach, right? The soft launch. So it's like, I'm going to invite our friends and family, a nice warm crowd. Hopefully it's all great, but we want you to tell us some areas that might not work or way we can do better on, ways we can improve before we sort of take it to the masses. So it's a very uh, friendly crowd you're firing into.
Yes. So it's a way to work out the kinks, work out the
Mm-hmm.
bugs. Um, Another thing that has worked really well for me getting over the perfectionist thing. Um, when I was very young, taking art in junior high, my art teacher told me that I couldn't draw.
Oh.
And that had a huge impact on my psyche for a very long time. It still does to this day. And so I had all kinds of issues with putting artwork out there, like that I had done with a pen or a paintbrush or, with my hands. And one of the things that really helped me with that was doing a daily challenge. And there's a lot of these out there.
Mm.
There's a 365 photography challenge where you take a photo a day for a year. The one that I do quite regularly is called the 100-Day Project. It runs for the same period every year. And the idea is that you create something every day for 100 days in a row. And the key part of it is you post it to social media, Instagram in particular, with a hashtag.
Wow.
And the first time I did this, I've done several of them. It's every April, I think, if anybody out there is interested. Um, I've done several of them, and the first one was terrifying. It was terrifying to put my little doodles out there, especially when the finished product might be something that I would never normally show anybody outside of my sketchbook.
Sure.
But because this was the whole purpose behind the 100-Day Project, putting that out there every day really forced me to get over it. Like, just get over myself.
Yeah, and you only had the day. You
You
couldn't
had the
come
day.
back
Yeah.
and tinker with it
No.
tomorrow.
Yeah, exactly. And you know what? Doing that for 100 days made me realize that A, nobody cared about the silly little mistakes that I could see. I could see 100 mistakes. They just
Mm-hmm.
saw it and went, "Oh, that's cute."
Yeah.
And the other thing I learned is that, like you said, people like imperfection. People just,
Mhm.
they respond to things that make them feel something. They
Yes.
don't care if it's perfect, if it makes them feel happy. I mean, I was drawing Miss Doodle, who's my little stick figure creation. This is not great art here, people.
Oh, I beg to differ
she's
as
a
a girl who can't draw.
she's a doodle. She's a stick figure doodle, but she's super cute and she's fun and she's bright and she's colorful and she just made people happy. People liked seeing her in their
Mm-hmm.
feed because she made them happy. And that was a big lesson for me to realize that, it's not what you put out there, it's how you make people feel when you put things
Mm-hmm.
out there.
Well, and I think the beauty of the a project like that is that you also get to see someone's transformation. And if you're practicing something every day for 100 days, there's going to be a transformation. You can't help but get better, I suspect.
Absolutely. And that's a really surefire way. What do they say? 10,000 hours to
Mm-hmm.
master a skill. But doing something like that is a great way. You have 100 little pieces of artwork or whatever you decide to create in front of you, and you can look at the first one and you can look at the last one, and you can see your
Mm-hmm.
progress in the span of a little over 3 months. And it's
Mm-hmm.
amazing how far people progress in that. And that's a real confidence boost right there. That gives you
Yeah.
courage right there. Like, oh my, you know what? I can get better. I did get
and
better.
and seeing the aggregate of your work, like I do think that we get lost sometimes in the day-to-day minutia of things, and being able to step back after 100 days of committing to any sort of creative challenge, and see all of that work together would encourage you to continue that practice, I would
Yes,
think, and
definitely.
try to push down some of that, whether it's the perfectionism or the procrastination.
Absolutely. And it's one of the reasons why I have done that challenge. I think this will be my 5th year if I do it this year. So it's because I can see that progress in myself, and now I have no issue putting my artwork on Instagram. I mean, obviously, outside of the 100 days, I do put my better artwork on
Mm-hmm.
Instagram. I don't want to bombard people, but um yeah, there is really something to be said about taking on a creative challenge, and you don't have to share the work, but it really does help you get over that fear of putting things out there. And
Mm-hmm.
it doesn't have to be 100 days. There's all kinds of challenges out there. Here in BC, Opus Art Supplies does their February Opus Daily Practice. It's 28 days or 29 this month of
Mm-hmm.
prompts um, for you to create artwork. But there's tons of them out there. Just search for them on Instagram or whatever social media platform you're on and take part in one. Just see how it
Mm-hmm.
goes.
Yeah, that's a really good way to put in some accountability, create a bit of a habit, and get out of your own way.
Absolutely. So, what else can people do to help them push through this?
Well, I think one of the big things for me is I know like I said, I research a lot. I think I can get into that analysis paralysis type of space. But what I have learned is that when I've looked at something and edit it, take it in the feedback, I sometimes need to walk away for a period of time and then come back and just hit send. So it's not so know that I've edited, but I'm not going to go back and do it again and again and again. I have to just come back and accept it, but allowing myself a bit of time to sit with the feedback and not feel like I need to hit the send button right away. So it kind of sits with me.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. And I think when people do give you feedback, taking that time to walk away. Also, sometimes when we get feedback, especially when it's something that's really personal to us, um, we can immediately go on the defensive. I think
Yes.
that's a very normal response for a lot of people.
Ask my husband.
We've all done it. We have all done it. If you haven't done it, then I don't believe you. But we've all done that, and I think sometimes, especially in this day and age of social media and instant gratification, it is so easy to just jump on your email or jump on your phone and type back a nasty response
Hmm.
without just taking a moment to kind of step back and say, okay, first of all, was this person being nasty? Because a lot of the time they're not. They're just
Hmm.
offering you, people generally speaking, I think, want to help more than they want to hurt.
100%. And if you read back feedback that you receive in a non-audio format with a sing-song voice, it's amazing how different it sounds. So I can easily read someone's feedback and take it as a negative, or I can change the tone of how I think they're saying it, and it can actually be quite helpful and constructive.
Yeah, if they come back and say, "Oh my god, this painting sucks." Okay,
Yeah.
yes. That's not constructive or appropriate criticism. That's just somebody being kind of a jerk. But
Hmm.
if somebody comes back to you and says, "Oh, this is great, but you know what? I think I don't know, you have a typo here." Like that's a big
Hmm.
one people get very defensive about is grammar. And it's like, you know what? Just put your phone down, step back for a little while, and then just kind of say to yourself, you know what? I did have a typo there. And if this
Hmm.
person hadn't caught it, I would have put it out into the world in another way or something, I don't know, with a typo. Like
Hmm.
like I should thank them. And
I know. And it's funny because I think the negative feedback is the stuff that sticks, right? So I have a book on Amazon. I think there's 180 reviews. It's between a couple of different sites. And one individual wrote the word yuck when they described my book. And I thought, I don't care how I say that in a sing song voice, that's still yuck.
that was the
And then,
review, one word, yuck.
yeah, that was the title of the review. Yuck. And then I think the text was, not for me. And like for so, I'm still talking about it. It still bothers me. But I like to think that it was at that point where I realized, oh, it doesn't matter. Like, it's if it's yuck to you, that's okay. I don't have to feel ill will. I would love a different choice of words, but I don't have to feel hurt or that's their opinion. Art is subjective, and I got a lot of feedback when I was writing the book and designing my cheese boards. I would, send two to people to look at and say, did you like, A or B, kind of the same components? And they'd come back and say, I like B, I like B, I like B. And I still liked A. And the other day I chose A. Like, I think it's okay to let it sit, take the feedback, let it sit, and then ultimately you chart your own course.
Yeah. And sometimes your course can be, it's okay if your course goes against the grain.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes that's more interesting. But yes, when it comes
Mm-hmm.
to getting that kind of feedback, it is important to remember that it is subjective, it is art. And I just remember one thing my parents always used to say to me, and I've really grown to appreciate it as an adult, is that, you can please some of the people some of the time, but you
Mm-hmm.
can never please all of the people all of the time.
So true.
And once you kind of come to terms with that, it makes it a lot easier to just remind yourself that I'm going to put this out there. Not everyone's going to like it. And that is okay because
Mm-hmm.
I like it.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes, especially if you're doing one of these challenges, you're going to put stuff out there that you don't like. And
Yeah.
I have done that, and I have said, I don't like this. Like, I
Mm-hmm.
did this, I don't like it, but that's okay because tomorrow I'll do something else.
Yeah, absolutely. And one thought on that with the even the feedback loop, you also don't always have to ask for feedback. So if you're wanting to put something out on social media, you don't have to leave the comment section open. You can
Yeah.
just put your art out. It can just be a gallery for you. You can send it out to the world, but you can turn comments off on things and say, I'm not really interested in positive or negative. I'm not
Yes.
really interested in feedback. And that might be what you, depending on how you're hardwired, that might be what you need to do to allow yourself to continue to put out, your work.
Okay, so walking away, taking a moment, and
Mm-hmm.
and coming back to it. I think that's also an important thing to do sometimes, even before you put something out there. Like when
Mm-hmm.
you've written something, or you've painted something, or whatever the case may be, and you put it down, put it in a drawer, take it off your desk, take it off your easel, wherever it is, and just put it away for a week and come back to it and look at it with fresh eyes.
Mm-hmm.
I can't tell you how many times I've done that, especially with logo design, where I have finished up a logo. I'm okay with it, and then I put it away, and I come back a week later and look at it with really fresh eyes and go, no, you know what? That's not working, or this piece
Mm-hmm.
isn't working, or I need to change this. It can really help, and it does make you realize that sometimes the first time out of the gate isn't the one.
No,
you
that's
know
right.
and
Exactly.
it's okay to reiterate and change things. So
Yeah, and I think as a someone who sort of comes in it from a perfectionist perspective, I also have to become very comfortable with even the best version won't be perfect. Like, shocker, my best stuff isn't perfect, but it's all relative. In the moment, it's perfect for me and what I needed to do. And it's just reframing that definition, I think.
better done than perfect.
So
It
true.
is. I feel like that should be on my wall.
Yeah, it's not. There's a doodle for you, Miss Doodle. No, I think we've gone over a few different, I think we talked about getting someone to help you stay accountable. I think that's really important. And, if that's, like I said, a friend or someone that you can kind of work together, especially a fellow creative, there's a real value in community. And I think we'll talk a little bit about community in upcoming episodes and the value of creating different types of groups, masterminds, creative communities, advisory boards, just
hmm
people that you can work with.
and
Um,
you know what, it's so if you want to hire an account like an actual accountability coach, you can do that.
that's true.
I have a coaching client right now who I'm there to make sure she does what she needs to do.
Yeah, there's a lot. That is money well spent, I'll tell you. Just having someone, especially that might even not be a friend or in your personal circle, like that has a bit of distance.
hmm It's just,
Mm.
that's exactly what it is. Having a bit of distance, they're not as emotionally involved in it as you are.
Mhm.
They're able to sometimes see where you're too emotionally involved to
Mm-hmm.
it to make a to put something out there, and they're able to give you some strategies to help you hit those deadlines that you've created for yourself and actually get your work out there.
Yeah, exactly. I think it's important to really take advantage of those people that are around you, because I think people like to help. I love giving my opinion too often sometimes.
That's why we have a podcast, so we can give our opinions to the
That's
world.
right. Exactly. Exactly. No, I mean, ultimately, there is a bit of a just kind of do it mentality that eventually has to occur too. Otherwise, you're never going to be able to get your work out there. You're never going to possibly make a living off your work. Like, and it's sort of sounds almost oversimplified, but I would, it's kind of like when you get into a pool or a lake where eventually you just have to jump in and get under and it'll be okay. I think there is a bit of a just do it mentality to some of this.
There absolutely is. And I think that tends to be more my personality. I do tend to be the type
Mm-hmm.
to jump in and do things um, without.
Thank goodness, or this podcast would never have happened.
But here's an interesting exercise we did at one of the Food Bloggers of Canada conferences. It was super simple, and this is something you can absolutely do at home. And that was, we gave everyone a piece of paper and an envelope, and we told them to write down a big leap. The whole theme of the conference that year was taking a leap. And we told them to write down a big leap that they wanted to make within their business, their blog, something along those lines. Put it in the in the envelope, put their address on it, and we collected them all. And the conference was in late October. And then on January 1st, we took all the envelopes, put stamps on them, and put them in the mailbox and mailed them out to people.
Oh, fun.
It was really fun. And we heard back from a lot of people who were like, oh my God, I forgot that I did this. But
Mm-hmm.
we also heard back from a lot of people who said, I did it. Like, I did it. And they were so excited and so proud of themselves. And it was just that little thing they needed to make that leap. And that's something you can do at home. I mean, you don't have to mail yourself a letter, but you could do that if you wanted to. It would work.
Mm-hmm.
But what you could do is just write down the things you want to do. I find this is something that works very well for me. It might not work for
Mm-hmm.
everyone, but writing down my goals, whether it's for the month, for the year, for the quarter, just writing them down, getting them out of my head. And then sometimes I don't even look at them again
Mm-hmm.
until like a year goes by and I flip through my journal or my planner and I see my goal page and I scan down the list and realize that I've done
Wow.
90% of them. And it's just the act of putting it out there somewhere, like
Mm-hmm.
getting it out there, even if I'm the only one who sees it. I don't know, something about writing it kind of helps manifest it in a weird woo woo way.
No, I think there's a lot of value to that. Absolutely. I think that actually might be something we dive into in a later episode, is really the act of planning, like short term, kind of setting goals short term, daily, weekly, but then also longer term ones, 6 months, quarterly, a year down the road, because I think people, there's so much value in seeing the transformation. I think I go back to that. That's where a lot of emotion comes from. And when you can see where you've come in a year, it's pretty
Yeah.
spectacular.
Yes, absolutely. It can make you feel really good about yourself too. And we all need those little bursts of cheerleading now and then, make us realize that we have gone a long way from where we started.
Yeah. And ultimately, sometimes you have to lower the bar. I find, and this is for me definitely when it comes to creative expression through drawing or painting in sort of those traditional mediums. As a perfectionist, I expect to draw a perfect tree on my first attempt, maybe my second. And anything less than that, I'm out. And I've really learned to embrace that there's a process to it. And I have to sit with the what questionably doesn't even look like a tree, and perhaps put in the work, like the 100-day challenges or some of the things we've talked about, before I'm going to see some progress. And lowering the bar a bit for yourself in whatever sort of creative medium you have, I do think that's going to help get more of your work out there.
Yeah, and that comes down to better done than perfect.
Mm-hmm.
Is just picking up the brush, the pen, the knitting needles, whatever it may
Mm-hmm.
be, and actually trying it and doing it over and over again and practicing. And I think one of the challenges is, and I think especially if you're a person who is somebody who finds a lot of things easy, or
Mm-hmm.
especially if you're somebody who did really well in school, or you did really well in sports, or there was just certain things that come very easily to you. When
Mm-hmm.
you come up against something that doesn't come easy, it can be very easy to resist against it, or just not pursue it further because you didn't get it right the first or second time.
Mm-hmm.
And I think, you have to just kind of have a little moment with yourself and remind yourself that
Mm-hmm.
not everything does come easily to everyone. And you're going to come up against things, and walking away from it and quitting isn't necessarily the answer. Like, ask yourself
Mm-hmm.
what would happen if you tried it a third time or a fourth time, and then do it.
And remembering why you're doing it. Like no one's forcing you to learn these new skills or, maybe tap into a bit of your creative side. I mean, for me, that's exactly, school came very easily. Played a lot of sports, things that had very direct, tangible results tied to them. And as much as I enjoy and have enjoyed this whole creative journey that I sort of took on in the second chapter of my life, it's a real mindset shift. Say that a few times. Mindset shift for that. There is no tangible outcome. There's no right or wrong. Nobody is a winner or a loser. Like it is truly doing it for the art of doing it and enjoying the process, not just checking a box. And when I've been able to shift that mindset, I've been able to push down some of that perfectionism, procrastination, and actually and produce things I'm proud of.
Yes. There's no winning in art. There's no 100% in art. There's no, you can't get all the points in
Yeah,
art. Like, they're just, that doesn't exist. And that can be really hard to wrap your head around if that's not a world that you're used to.
1,000%. Yes, that is exactly how I would describe it. I want to win. I want to get the best.
You want
I
all
want
the
all the
points.
check marks. I want the gold star. And yeah, when that's not a part of this experience, it's a very uncomfortable, but we know that I know that being uncomfortable creates growth. And so I'm willing to kind of get in the trenches and be vulnerable about it, in order to put it out there.
I think another thing that can really help, especially if you are more towards the perfectionist side of things, is to be careful what you consume on social media.
Oh, good point.
Because social media, particularly visual social media like Instagram, really does reinforce that whole perfectionism
Mm-hmm.
thing. um, and this is something that I struggle with tremendously. And I know you do as well,
Mm-hmm.
to the point where it really affects my mental health. Like, it just makes me feel really bad about myself. And I have
Mm-hmm.
had to go through and mute and even unfollow a lot of people because what they put out there is too perfect for me,
Mm-hmm.
for my brain personally to process.
Yeah, it's lost the inspiration that it doesn't. Good feelings don't well up from it.
Exactly. There's no inspiration, and I feel like it's very unattainable for me. And I think
Mm-hmm.
that is, feeling like something is unattainable can also encourage you to procrastinate and become a perfectionist, because you just feel
Mm-hmm.
like you're never going to get there. So why bother?
Yeah.
Right? So I think that's really important. And if you notice that happening to yourself, then maybe it is time to not look at those type of accounts so much, and look at the ones
Mm-hmm.
that inspire you instead. And it can be a very fine line between
Mm-hmm.
inspiration and unattainability.
Yes, exactly. Well, and I think part of some of the discussions you and I have had about is injecting a lot more real life into the stuff that we're doing. Technology can make anything perfect, but if you don't look there, if you step away from that and you sit around a kitchen table with some art or some yarn or paper or whatever your choice is, and experience it in real life, not through the lens of a filter, airbrush, color enhancer, even a spell check, and you truly just create, it's so much more satisfying. Like the ignorance is bliss truly is, yeah, it's a real thing.
And that's something to remind yourself of too, is that if you do something that doesn't turn out the way you want it to today, make something new tomorrow. Like there's always
Mm-hmm.
a next time. And if you're somebody who creates, let's say you're like a digital content creator or something like that, and you put something out there and it doesn't quite fly, you know what? You can go back and you can fix it. You can update
Mm-hmm.
it. You can change it. Like in the age that we live in today, things can be very fluid. And there is a
Mm-hmm.
lot of opportunity to go back and change things and adapt things. So I think it's just really important to remember that that thing that you do right now isn't your end point.
Mm-hmm.
There's there's always another day where you can try and make something
Another
different.
iteration.
And the more that you create, the more ideas will come to you. So I think really what it comes down to is first of all recognizing why you're getting obsessed over a minor detail or why you're pushing off a task and asking yourself what's behind it and recognizing that there is maybe some fear there or some resistance, and then finding strategies that work for you to help you overcome
Mm-hmm.
that. And we've talked about several of them. So we talked about um, finding an accountability coach. We've talked about creating like an advanced copy or a beta copy or something that invites feedback, but maybe isn't necessarily the finished product. We've talked about taking feedback and taking a moment before you respond to it.
Mm-hmm.
What else have we talked about?
We've talked about, let's see, not overestimating your own importance in other people's lives with the work that you're putting out there, and that they're not going to spend nearly as much time on it as you have. Setting up even a bit of a reward system for yourself, whether that's time off, time with friends, whatever really personally you have to sacrifice in order to create your art. So setting up your own sort of systems that reward when you do meet those milestones. Definitely lowering the bar. Better done than perfect, I think, is a much more positive way to say that. But really, that it's just about going through the practice, get something done, get something on the paper, and not paralyzing yourself in pursuit of perfection.
Yes. And then things like, limiting yourself on social media in terms of the type of content you consume. And it
Mm-hmm.
doesn't even have to be social media, it can be other forms of content. And then also just taking that leap sometimes,
Mm-hmm.
just stepping off the cliff and doing it and see what happens. And I guarantee you, as somebody who's stepped off many cliffs, not literally, figuratively, you know what? Most of the time, nothing bad happens at all. You'll win. If you need to win, you will win far more than you will lose.
I think your idea around the 100-day project, whether you follow the official one, and we'll link that as well, but creating any sort of uh, 10, 30, 100-day objective for yourself and putting yourself out there, I think is a great plan.
There's lots of them online that you can find, but if you can't find one that speaks to you online, just create your own.
And spending time, whether it's through a journal or a planner, going through the what if assessment. If I do this, what if, even this just sort of a form of meditation or personal time with yourself to walk you so that you're prepared. It kind of just helps sometimes to walk yourself through scenarios that are likely never going to occur anyway.
Yeah, but at least you're
Mm-hmm.
prepared if they do.
Excellent.
Okay, well, I think we've covered everything we wanted to cover today. This is a big topic, and it's one that we know so many people struggle with. We struggle with it, so we knew it was going to be something that hopefully appeals to all of you out there listening.
I'd be really curious as to what other people do to like push through those moments of uncertainty, procrastination, or feel like, yeah, I'd love to hear if there's other things that people are doing that we haven't thought of or touched on today?
Yeah, absolutely. So you'll be able to head over to our website at andshелookedup.com, and you'll be able to leave a comment on the post that goes with this episode, which is where I think we will also have the show notes
Absolutely.
and with links to some of the things that we've talked about today that could help you. And I think that's probably it until next week.
That sounds wonderful. That was fun. That was a good chat.
Yeah, it was. So we'll see you all next week, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us for the And She Looked Up Creative Hour. If you're looking for links or resources mentioned in this episode, you can find detailed show notes on our website at andshелookedup.com. While you're there, be sure to sign up for our newsletter for more business tips, profiles of inspiring Canadian creative women, and so much more. If you enjoyed this episode, please be sure to subscribe to the show via your podcast app of choice so you never miss an episode. We always love to hear from you, so we'd love it if you'd leave us a review through iTunes or Apple Podcasts. Drop us a note via our website at andshелookedup.com or come say hi on Instagram at andshелookedup. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next week.